In this video, I'm going to be talking about how identity impacts perceptions of climate change. I once sat through a 2-day training that included presentations showing sea level rise impacts to the area where I was working in coastal Virginia. The workshop included lots of time for participatory activities and conversations, and an explanation from a local and trusted community scientist about how sea level rise is caused by climate change. Everybody in the room who lived on the shore had seen the evidence of increased coastal flooding, or what they called recurrent coastal flooding. Flooding roads that didn't used to be flooded more regularly, salinization of farm fields, marshland moving inland as sea level rose. So people knew that things were changing. After the 2 days, one man asked the same question he had asked bright and early the first morning, and that was, but what is causing the sea levels to rise? If we knew what was causing it, then maybe we could really do something about it. Well, he just wasn't as convinced by the evidence the scientists had presented about climate change as I was, the evidence that I had considered incontrovertible. This man was an intelligent and respected community planner in one of the nearby counties, and he was now armed with the same information I was, but we had come to vastly different conclusions about what was causing the flooding. So what was going on here? I can't say for sure, but I would guess our differing conclusions had something to do with the way we identify ourselves and conceive of our places in the world, our identity. I am an environmental educator and a self-proclaimed environmentalist since age 5, while this man hailed from a relatively conservative community where people tend to distrust federal government and the state government, of which there were several representatives in the room. Over the last decade, climate change, communication, and psychology researchers have shown that identity can play a very key role in how and what people choose to accept or not accept about climate change, even more important than having access to information. There are many ways of thinking about identity. One of the fundamentals of identity is that individuals are active constructors of their own experiences. In other words, individuals select, interpret, and tell their own stories about their experiences in ways that differ from individual to individual. We have individual perceptions of our experiences. For our purposes today, let's think about identity in terms of how people define themselves or are defined in relation to a particular group. This could be a political affiliation, like Democrats or Republicans. It could be an ethnicity, an interest group like forester or farmer or extension associate, or a gardener or educator. And if you think about it, if you think about your group, I bet you can list certain norms or expectations that come along with being a member of that group. For example, as an environmental educator, I am expected to bring a reusable coffee mug or water bottle to professional events, and in general, I expect the same of other educators. So now let's take a look at how identity affects our climate change reasoning. You may have heard derogatory language aimed at so-called climate deniers or skeptics that suggests they don't know enough about science to understand that anthropogenic climate change is happening. It turns out that identity has a lot more to do with someone's quote-unquote belief in climate change than his or her understanding of science. Dan Kahan, a faculty member at Yale Law School and a researcher at Yale's Cultural Cognition Project, tested whether people's science literacy was related to their so-called belief in climate change, and he found a really interesting pattern. As Democrats become more scientifically literate, they are more likely to accept anthropogenic climate change. However, as conservative Republicans become more scientifically literate, they are less likely to accept anthropogenic climate change. Kahan's study is evidence that people rely more on their identity to guide their evaluation of climate change rather than on evidence. But it's certainly more complicated than just political party. Jonathan Schultz from Cornell University and Adam Pearson from Pomona College found that political polarization in the U.S. around climate change beliefs is strongest among whites. Non-white minorities, however, don't divide along political party lines. Conservative whites are less likely to believe in climate change, less likely to support federal policies limiting greenhouse gases, and less likely to believe in scientific consensus around climate change than liberal whites are. But for non-whites, the study found that there was much less of a correlation between political affiliation and climate change belief. So why the difference? Schultz and Pearson suggest that minorities may be more motivated by the concerns of their subgroups, or concerns like being more susceptible to environmental hazards or being susceptible to climate change impacts than they are by their broader political values. How do we deal with the realities of identity protective cognition and climate change? We can start by trying to reduce our own use of polarizing language and focus on areas on which we can agree with people who have different ideas about climate change. In the US, one area of possible collaboration is renewable energy, where even the highly conservative states have promoted the growth of solar energy. Public health and faith-based work are two other areas that could provide bridges between identity groups. We've featured research from the US on identity and climate change in this video, but we encourage you to think about the idea of identity protective thinking, of coming to or jumping to conclusions based not on facts, but on your identity, in the context of your own country and community.